It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the LG 34GK950F. The OSD is controlled by a little joystick on the underside of the bottom bezel. It has a red power LED if you've got that feature enabled in the OSD, which glows red, sort of a red colour rather than pink as it appears on the video, and it's not really visible from in front of the monitor. So you don't generally notice it anyway, but you can disable it if you prefer. And if the monitor goes into standby, low power state, so it loses signal to the computer, that'll start blinking. You'll notice a slight difference to the G-Sync model. There isn't an additional joystick to control the sphere lighting feature because there isn't sphere lighting on this monitor. That's something which this model lacks, but the G-Sync alternative has. And if you press that in, the joystick, you'll get this little sort of radial quick menu. Whereas if you just sort of twiddle it left or right, you can adjust the volume of anything connected to the 3.5mm jack. Or if you twiddle it up or down, you can quickly adjust the brightness of the screen. But the radial quick menu has various options. Power off if you then push the joystick away from you. There's game mode, input, and settings. So input allows you to choose the input used by the monitor. Game mode gives you a sort of a quick gaming menu. There are various different gaming presets. Gamer 1, Gamer 2. These are fully adjustable. You can change all of the settings with these. The other ones are more restrictive. There's FPS, RTS. So Gamer 1, Gamer 2, FPS and RTS. There are some more presets on the monitor, but they're not included in this little gaming quick menu. So I'll go through them shortly. The main menu, which is accessed with the settings feature from the radial quick menu, has a few little things repeated from the game menu I showed you earlier. So you can see the refresh rate, whether FreeSync's enabled and the mode it's enabled in, the 1 millisecond motion blur reduction feature, what the response time is set to, and also the HDR status of the monitor. So first up, there's game mode. And that has various options. You can see Gamer 1, Gamer 2, FPS and RTS, which were shown in the quick menu I showed you before. But also a few others, Vivid, Reader, HDR Effect and sRGB. These are explored in the written review, so I'm not going to go through them here. Most of them just upset the image. The Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 are good because they offer full flexibility. The Reader mode is a low blue light setting, which is potentially quite useful as well, although it also reduces the contrast as I explore in the review. So you could actually just make your own low blue light settings using one of the gamer profiles there, Gamer 1 or Gamer 2, which is what I've done, and there's a suggestion about how you do that in the written review. HDR effect, again, explored in the written review, messes up the image basically. sRGB, which is an sRGB emulation setting, which greatly reduces the colour gamut of the monitor and reduces the saturation, so that's useful for some users. Game adjust, 1 millisecond motion blur reduction, that's explored in the review. You can enable that or disable that as long as you're running the monitor at 144 or 120 Hz, although it only actually works properly at 144 Hz as I explore in the review. FreeSync, you can set that to extended, basic or off. If you've got an NVIDIA GPU, you might find that this is not grayed out, and you can set that to whatever you want, but it doesn't make a difference with the NVIDIA GPU. It's you're not going to magically get FreeSync just because you've enabled this on the monitor, but if you do have a FreeSync compatible GPU or system, you can set this to extended or basic. The difference is that basic is indeed very basic, and it restricts the variable refresh rate range massively and is essentially useless, whereas extended is the proper FreeSync support of the monitor. So either have that set to off or extended depending on your system. Next up, there's black stabilizer. This is very much like BenQ's black equalizer. Various other manufacturers have similar settings, and this adjusts the gamma, in particular the sort of darker shades, so that they appear differently. And if you increase this, I'll just show you with the Legon website open because it sort of aids the explanation a bit. If you increase this, the visibility of those dark shades improves, so you can see those blocks are way more visible, and that will give you a competitive edge in games if you want to see enemies more clearly against the background or whatever. If you set that to 50, it's neutral, things look as it should, as they should. If you decrease that further, it kind of gives a more cinematic, deeper look. It sort of makes things look a bit weird, to be honest. but it's basically there if you want a competitive edge in your game, and it's quite flexible and it doesn't sort of completely flood the image or anything with slight adjustments, so it's quite a good implementation of such a feature. Response time explored in the review, various different settings there. I consider faster to be optimal. It was set to fast just because I was doing some responsiveness setting just before this video, and I forgot to change it back to faster. But there's faster, fast, normal and off. There's an on-screen crosshair feature, so you can have a little crosshair in the middle of the screen. There are various different designs, sort of a standard cross, red or green, or a blob design, red or green. So I've got the green crosshair just in the middle of the screen there. You can see little green crosshair. You can set that to the other designs if you prefer. And there is game reset, which sets everything on the game adjust menu to the factory defaults. Next is picture adjust. It allows you to adjust the brightness, contrast, the sharpness, which is in increments of 10. And this can be useful if you're setting the monitor to a non-native resolution. You might find that increasing the sharpness slightly to 60 is helpful there. I explore this a bit in the written review. 50 provides a good neutral sharpness, and you can adjust that according to your preferences if you'd like, but 50 is really what most users should just keep it on. There are 4 different gamma settings which are explored in the review. Color temp, you can set that to custom, warm, medium or cool, and custom will allow you to change the red, green and blue color channels of the monitor manually. Black level, that is greyed out unless you're using an HDMI connection. And if I recall correctly, there are 2 different settings there. There is high or low, and high is your normal full range RGB signal, which you'll be using as a PC user or for most modern games consoles. But if you have to use a limited RGB signal, then set that to low. There's DFC, dynamic fine contrast, which is the dynamic contrast function of the monitor, which is explored in the review as well. Picture reset, which resets everything on this particular menu to the factory defaults. Input does what it says on the tin, allows you to select the input used by the monitor, HDMI port 1, HDMI port 2 or display port. And there's a ratio setting. I will come back to this right at the end because there are some quite interesting little sort of things you can do there if you're using a non-native resolution. General language that the OSD is displayed in, you can change that. Smart energy saving, and what this will do is it'll slightly dim the monitor if you're displaying lots of dark content. It's kind of like a very slight dynamic contrast mode. This is actually set to high by default, I believe, which means it'll do that. So if you sort of notice the monitor flickering a bit, just disable this because it's probably caused by that. And by flickering, I mean the brightness kind of adjusting every now and then. But it's just conserves a little bit of energy, so that's why it does that. But just set it to off if you want a more consistent performance. It's a power LED, which I showed you earlier. You can have that disabled if you prefer not to have the power LED showing, although as I said, you can't really see it from a normal viewing position anyway. Automatic standby. This will put a message on the screen after 4 hours, 6 hours or 8 hours if you select one of those, and it'll just say that the screen is going to sort of turn off if you don't press any buttons, and then it'll go on to standby into its low power state after that time if you haven't twiddled the joystick or whatever. So it's kind of a bit of a nag feature. I like to keep that set to off. HDMI compatibility mode, again that's relevant if you're using HDMI. I'm using DisplayPort at the moment. And you can set the DisplayPort version if you're using DisplayPort. 1.4 unleashes the full functionality of the monitor. But if you're using an older system which doesn't have that and it's not displaying an image, you have to set that to something more appropriate for your system. Buzzer. I think there's just a little sound when you first turn the monitor on. So I just disabled that because I didn't really find the sound particularly useful. It's just a strange little feature. OSD lock, that will make it so your family members can't easily mess around with your OSD settings, particularly your younger family members. If you don't want them to sort of mess things up, then set the OSD lock on. So you can't easily change various settings on the OSD now until you disable the OSD lock, like that. Information, that displays basic information about the model number itself, the serial number, the total power on time, the resolution and refresh rate, and also the fact that it's using AMD FreeSync 2 if you've got FreeSync enabled on the monitor and set to extended, as I have at the moment. Now, as I promised, I will go back and go through the image ratio options now. I'm now on Battlefield 5, so I can show you how the ratio settings work, how the scaling process works on the monitor. If you recall before, I only had full wide and original selectable, everything else was greyed out. That's because I had FreeSync enabled, and only the first two are selectable if you've got FreeSync on. But at the moment I've got FreeSync off and I'm running the native resolution, so all of these options are available, but some of them are not applicable to the full native resolution, and things will look exactly as they do normally anyway. It doesn't change anything. So I'll use a different resolution to explore some of these shortly. But Cinema 1 and Cinema 2, they basically sort of zoom and crop the image, so you can see it looks a bit weird. I don't really know what the purpose of these would be, but maybe there is some content where people want to zoom in slightly to it and have it sort of cropped at the side, so it's essentially an overscan feature. So I'm just going to be focusing on the other three for now. Now, full wide, I'm just going to set this to full HD so I can show you what this does. I've now got it set to full HD at 144 Hz. However, you will notice that if I change this setting, it doesn't actually do anything. And that's because to use the scaling process of the monitor, you actually need to have it set to 75 Hz or 60 Hz. You can't have it set to 144 Hz. So it is quite restrictive in terms of which resolutions you can actually use this with and which refresh rates you can use it with. 2560 by 1440 I'll just mention as well. That isn't actually a resolution on this monitor. You can create a custom resolution, but you have to use GPU scaling. So I'm not going to go through that here either, because you can't actually use the ratio settings with 2560 by 1440. However, I've now got it at full HD, 75 Hz, and I can use these settings. Full wide, that will use all of the pixels on the monitor. You can see things are stretched because this is a 16 by 9 resolution and a 21 by 9 screen. If, however, you set this to original, you can see that there are now black borders at the sides and things aren't stretched horizontally. But there's also a degree of softening because interpolation is used, and that's explored in the written review. But that is because it has a 1080 vertical pixels rather than 1440, which the monitor uses, and these are being sort of mapped to the actual greater number of pixels of the monitor, and that always has a degree of softening associated with it. But other than that, it looks sort of undistorted. If you'd prefer it to be completely unsoftened and undistorted, you can instead select Just Scan, which is a one-to-one pixel mapping feature. It now looks like perfectly sharp full HD in obviously a very small, I think it's about 23 inches diagonal, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but a very small section in the middle of the screen, but there isn't distortion. If you'd like to sort of make more efficient use of the screen space without any kind of weird stretching because you want to keep the 21 by 9 aspect ratio, you can also create a custom resolution. Again, this is not a standard option. You do need to create a custom resolution for 2560 by 1080. Again, interpolation is used because it's non-native resolution, and I explore that, but it's actually quite a decent interpolation process that this monitor uses. It doesn't have a massive degree of softening. So this uses the full screen space, and that's quite a nice fallback if you don't have the graphical power to run 3440 by 1440 specifically. But before changing the resolution, I'd always recommend playing with other settings first to see what you can do. But because this is a 21 by 9 resolution, the original Just Scan and full wide have exactly the same effect in the end anyway. And whilst I've got the game running, I might as well show you the settings which are available in HDR when you've got high dynamic range active. And I think these are shown in the video review as well, but there's no harm in showing them again. I've got HDR enabled. I have FreeSync disabled. HDR is part of FreeSync too, but you can also use it with NVIDIA GPUs, and I certainly tested this with an NVIDIA system, and it was very much the same as the AMD system, apart from the fact you couldn't use FreeSync. But you can have FreeSync enabled at the same time as HDR, because that is indeed part of what FreeSync 2 does. It sort of combines the two things together. but you'll notice that quite a few things are greyed out. You can't access all of the game modes, and if you set to Gamer 1 or Gamer 2, which had all of the options available before, on Game Adjust you'll see that 1 millisecond MBR, motion blur reduction, is greyed out. That's actually because FreeSync's on, it's not anything to do with HDR specifically, but you can see that the black stabilizer is greyed out. And on Picture Adjust there is very little you can actually set. You can set the brightness, contrast and sharpness. I'm not going to go through this here because it's only an OSD video, but I do find it a little bit strange, the sort of flexibility you get with some of the settings, with it being HDR, but never mind. You can't change the gamma, colour, temperature or the colour channels, that kind of makes sense. But you can set it to various different presets and they have quite a pronounced effect on the image. And again, these are explored in the written review. I just thought I'd quickly show you that the options which you get when HDR is enabled are quite restricted compared to with HDR disabled. And you'll also see it says there HDR on. And that's really all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the LG 34GK950F. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do.